And also talking about schools, because obviously it's half term and there are a lot of kids off around Nottinghamshire, off school, having a lie-in this morning, or maybe off to the seaside. But there are a lot of kids who aren't in school a lot of the time. Got some staggering statistics to share with you. So, after COVID, when all the children went back to school and the schools opened their gates again, everyone assumed that the kids would just go back to school and everything would carry on as normal. But for many children, they didn't. They didn't go back to school. Often referred to as ghost children. These are children who are on a school register, but they're not going into school and they're not being homeschooled. And the government figures on this are staggering. So this is figures for persistently absent kids, which means like more than 10% of the time they're not there. More than like at least one day a fortnight they're not there. Almost a quarter of primary school pupils are persistently absent. And that rises to 27% of secondary schools. What is going on? Why are so many kids not in school all the time? So I've been speaking to one mum from Bramcote whose 14-year-old daughter is autistic and hasn't been to school for almost 3 years. And they explained the situation.
She hasn't been to school since September 2020. She was excited about going in because it was like, yeah, I'm going to be in year 7. But then she came back and it was like a completely different child. She just literally shut down and I never understood what happened. Now knowing, because of her autism, that it was like a burnout that she had and it was just too much sensory going on. I think she's, sad because she wants to go to school. But yeah, it's sad to see her that way because I remember her being like this happy, bubbly child. And yeah, now she's just quite reserved, like into herself. She can sometimes I'll hear her crying and yeah, I feel really bad about it. I don't understand why the system is so, I want to say broken, because it's like it's fallen apart, but there isn't anybody responsible, to kind of say, okay, well, there's an issue, we're working on it, and this is what we have in place to fix it. Right now, it's just a case of excuse.
And do you think the problem is with the schools or with the council or what?
I think it's the whole system. They're not communicating with each other. One department says that and the other one says that, and yeah, it gets a bit too confusing, for the family, the children, especially the children, because they can't really speak up.
And all this time she's been out of school. What's it been like for you?
In the beginning, it was kind of like, all right, this is what life is going to be like for a while. I gave up my business and things to kind of be at home to look after her, keep her positive, because that's the thing, you have to keep her positive.
That's Yemi and her daughter Grace, who you will hear from after the 8 o'clock news. Hasn't been to school in almost 3 years, and there's been a lot of waiting. There's been a lot of letters and emails sent. The county council have actually apologised for this situation. With almost 3 years out of school, she now has what's called alternative provision, which is kind of like school but not school. But it's 3 hours a week, just 3 hours a week. So what is going on? Heidi Mavir is a parent and author of a book called Your Child Is Not Broken. And I wonder if this is a familiar story. Morning, Heidi.
Good morning, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. You've been listening to Yemi and you'll hear Grace later. Is this a story you recognise?
Oh my gosh, so much. So what Yemi was just talking about, I hear this daily. I manage a community of parents online. We have over 10,000 families who are specifically parents of children who are neurodivergent, so autistic, ADHD, other neurodivergences, who are all experiencing barriers to attendance. It's a crisis. Our education system is in crisis.
So I couldn't quite believe it. I had to get a few people to check it yesterday when I was looking at the government figures. I had to get my news editor to come and have a second look when it said that 27% of kids in secondary school have been persistently absent since September. So more than a quarter. What do you think of that figure?
I mean, I'm not surprised. It's something that within our community, particularly within the neurodivergent parent community, particularly within the community of parents of autistic children, we've been experiencing this for over a decade. And it just feels like other parents, other families, it's catching up now. So we often find that when there are cracks in the system, it's the most marginalised families that experience that first. So that's what we've been seeing in parents of families of autistic children in particular. But now we're seeing that spill over into, I guess, the main body of children, and that figure has risen considerably. I wrote my book this time last year, and I looked at stats for 2019. So that was the term that my son fell out of school, crashed out of school, and at that time the figure was just under 1 million persistently absent children. Now we're up to 1.7 million persistently absent children. We're in a crisis.
Why do you think it is? Why are so many kids not going to school?
I mean, it's nuanced. Every family is different. And the difficulty we have is when we are using terms like ghost children and when we're looking at numbers, we are losing sight of the fact that these are all individual households. You know, for every one of that 1.7 million number, we have a family in crisis. There are no families who don't want their children in school. This number does not include people who have chosen to electively home educate. This is families whose children are on roll and who are not able to attend for whatever reason that might be. The biggest issue we seem to have currently, particularly for children who have special educational needs and disabilities, is the lack of resourcing, training and support for those children in mainstream settings. And it's even higher in specialist settings. If you look at the stats for specialist settings, the persistent absence rate in specialist settings is nearly 40%. So we have a system that doesn't support children who have special educational needs and disabilities, and that's a massive percentage of that number. But then what we're also getting is we have a traumatized generation of children who have been through, in essence, a kind of like an apocalypse, I guess. You know, we've never had it before where schools have closed, and we've got all these children and young people that are processing that, and there isn't the support and the resources for them in the school system to do that.
So you're saying this isn't just confined to SEND children, to children with special educational needs. You're saying this is a generation of traumatized kids.
Absolutely. And, by their nature, children who have special educational needs and disabilities are more likely to experience trauma. But I believe that we've got this across the board, that we've got children who are processing what has happened in their lifetime and without the support to do so. And we've also got families and parents who are traumatised. We've got families and parents who have lost their jobs during the pandemic. We've got a cost of living crisis. You know, it's all well and good saying, oh, well, just send your kids to school. But if you don't have the bus fare or if you don't have any means to get them there, then that's a barrier to attendance. So There are lots of reasons why children are out of school. But I think the main thing is the mental health crisis we're facing currently.
Can I ask you a question, and I ask it respectfully, and I don't mean to be offensive? Why can't these parents just make their children go to school? What would happen if they drove them there and pushed them through the gates?
I mean, I can tell you exactly what that looked like for us. My son was 15 when he hit mental health crisis and burnout. He was unidentified autistic. We didn't know he was autistic. He wasn't diagnosed. He hadn't been recognised. He was one of those children that, like a lot of children, kind of managed to mask his difficulties, made lots of accommodations for himself and got on okay. When we hit kind of barriers to attendance pre-pandemic, I had all of this from professionals. Just bring him in, just force him in. He was 14. I don't know if you've ever tried to force a 14-year-old to do anything. I mean, I was having conversations and saying, do you actually want me to pick him up and carrying him? And staff were saying, yes, bring him to school in his pyjamas. The obsession with getting that attendance mark drove my son to a mental health crisis. And we had a situation, I talk about it in the book, and since the book has come out, lots of parents have told me it's been mirrored across the board for them. We had what we called touching the gate. So we were told by school to just bring him to the car park, get him out of the car and touch the gate. And if he touched the gate, he got an attendance mark. He wasn't in school. He wasn't receiving any education.
That's balmy. Absolutely bonkers. Oh,
bonkers.
Okay.
And there are variations of that, variations.
Okay.
But the day that kind of like, I realised that wasn't working for us was the day that he had a full-blown panic attack when that was happening. And that's the day that I decided that I wouldn't force him any longer. But it took a long time to recover. But it's not as simple as just saying bring your kids into school. Parents are trying so hard. But then in the meantime, they're getting fined, they're getting prosecuted. We've seen a quadrupling of fines and prosecutions in the past 12 months. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to unpick.
Yeah, well, thank you for explaining some of it. It's been really interesting to hear from you. Heidi Mavir, who is a parent and author of a book called Your Child Is Not Broken. And those figures, which honestly I find really staggering, that 27% of kids in secondary school have been persistently absent since September. And more from Yemi and Grace, a mum and daughter in Bramcote, where she's not been in school for almost 3 years now.
A new family is on the square.
A story that is an example of this. This is a mum who lives in Bramcote. Her name is Yemi. Her daughter is 14 and has autism and hasn't been to school for almost 3 years.
She hasn't been to school since September 2020. She was excited about going in because it was like, yeah, I'm going to be in year 7. But then she came back and it was like a completely different child. She just literally shut down, and I never understood what happened. Now knowing, because of her autism, that it was like a burnout that she had, and it was just too much sensory going on. I think she's, sad because she wants to go to school, but yeah, it's sad to see her that way, because I remember her being like this happy, bubbly child, and yeah, now she's just quite reserved, like into herself. She can sometimes I'll hear her crying. And yeah, I feel really bad about it.
And I know that the County Council has had a really damning review recently. A report by Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission has looked at provision for kids like Grace and said that there's widespread failings. And one of those things that they criticised was the delays in the processes, the lack of getting back to parents, the struggles to get an educational healthcare plan. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, very, very, very much so. It'll be things like the coordinator would just disappear, or they're on holiday, or, so like Grace's file will be like stuck somewhere and there's nobody actually looking at it. And even the process of getting the plan, it's like it took about 3 or 4 months after it was in draft mode before they actually put it in the final mode. So in that time, there's more time wasted not being at school.
Yeah.
I don't understand why the system is so, I want to say, broken, because it's like it's fallen apart, but there isn't anybody responsible, to kind of say, okay, well, there's an issue, we're working on it, and this is what we have in place to fix it. Right now, it's just a case of excuse.
And do you think the problem is with the schools or with the council or what?
I think it's the whole system. They're not communicating with each other. One department says that and the other one says that, and it gets a bit too confusing, for the family, the children, especially the children, because they can't really speak up.
And all this time she's been out of school. What's it been like for you?
In the beginning, it was kind of like, all right, this is what life is going to be like for a while. I gave up my business and things to kind of be at home to look after her. Keep her positive, because that's the thing, you have to keep her positive.
There is a thing called alternative provision. It's kind of school but not school, so it's education but it's not in a school setting, and I know they have it at sometimes football clubs and doing creative things. For Grace, it's animals, but how successful has that been?
Okay, so with the alternative provision, she's doing some 3 hours in the farm. The only thing is that she's only getting 3 hours.
3 hours a week?
Yeah, so she only gets 3 hours a week. Out of the 160 places that they wrote to, only 2 came back. Even though that option is there, it's still very limited.
And what kind of impact do you think it will have on Grace, having not been in a school environment for so long?
Yeah, that bit scares me, because obviously she's been at home, and I don't know. I feel like she's missed out on those formative years. She's missed out on, the relationships, when to do things, when not to do things. Let's say, for instance, this doesn't get sorted by the time she's 16. She technically can go to college, but then it's like she was in year 6 and then she hasn't been to school, now she's in college. Like, I don't understand how the councils can, allow this to happen, to children, because she was 10 when this started.
So let's hear Grace's voice then. Is it possible to explain what it's like when you were in a school setting and what it felt like for you?
It literally felt like someone was covering my mouth, like I couldn't speak. It Feels like someone's like hitting my head with a hammer.
How do you feel about what's happened since?
I think it's made it a lot worse. It's hard knowing that like I'm not the only one who's going through this, knowing that there's like so many other people going through this. It's hard to know that they may have not been in school longer.
What's it like being at home? Because you'll know there'll be some kids listening to this thinking, I'd quite like to be at home. But what's it like when you've been at home for 3 years?
It's really like, I love you, Mum, but like it's hard. It's hard to be with her every single day. Like, I have really bad social anxiety anyway, so like I don't really go out a lot because I don't like talking to people.
Do you wish you could have stayed in school?
Yeah, I really wish that I had the right support at the right time to go back into school, because I think that if I had the right support, I would be back into school, and I really do wish I was back in school. I just want to make friends again, because I've lost all my friends, and I don't really know much. I don't know about maths, I don't know about science, and it's hard. So yeah, I'd love to learn again.